thank you all for being here for Artists in Harmony and History. So, a very unique event for the museum that goes along with a very unique exhibition that we have that's on view. So, if you haven't seen the exhibition Sound Formations, it's on view through July 13th, and it's actually open tonight during Art Walk from 6 to 9 p.m. So you can head over there right after the event. But it's an exhibition that highlights musical instruments made by local artists, craftspeople, and we think of them as works of art. So we're presenting them in that way at the museum. So we're very excited to have some of the instrument makers here tonight to talk about their instruments, the history of some of these instruments, the craftsmanship, and also have some amazing musicians to demonstrate the instruments. So, of course, a musical instrument hasn't really, lived its full journey until it's been played and heard, right? So, that's what we're here to do tonight. And we also had a concert about a month ago with kind of the same purpose of making the instruments come alive. We had a couple bands who were rained out at the end of the night, but one of the bands, the Baldy Crawlers, will be redoing their performance, or rescheduling their performance for July 5th during Art Walk. So 6 p.m., July 5th, first Saturday of the month, the Baldy Crawlers will be performing, as well as Vintage Music, who often plays our opening receptions. So check that out. And thank you for being here. I'm going to hand it over to Thea, who organized this amazing event.
Hi everyone, I'm Thea Whitaker. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the museum, and I'm just going to sort of walk you through our program tonight. We're going to start with Richard Barnes and go on to Otto D'Ambrosio, and then we'll wrap up with Warren Shingleton, and then we have musical performances interspersed in between, which will be really exciting because we have access to some really world-class talent in the area. I'm going to go through some bios real quick so that we're all on the same page of who we're talking to. Richard Barnes is an artist, luthier, painter, draftsman, sculptor, and educator whose work integrates craftsmanship, music, and design. His musical expertise spans a wide range of instruments, and he blends historical and cultural influences into his own compositions. His deep connection to music complements his academic role as professor of industrial design, engineering, manufacturing technology, manufacturing technology at Mount San Antonio College, where he teaches the fusion of ancient artistic principles with the modern manufacturing techniques. Otto D'Ambrosio started his art practice at an early age and took inspiration from his great-grandfather and namesake, who was a sculptor. As a teenager, he started working in instrument creation and repair, turning wood into music. He worked his way up until he opened his own shop where he builds guitars and fretted instruments that marry contemporary forms with classical aesthetic. Otto's instruments have been played by some incredible musicians, and he has repaired vintage instruments that are literally irreplaceable. And finally, Warren Shingleton grew up in, I've never actually said the word out loud. Warren, how do you pronounce that? That place in New York. Viola and violin were quickly introduced, and a journey through music was nurtured. He studied guitar making on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and making viols in England. Warren settled into Claremont to fabricate viols by hand on commission. He uses historical techniques while focusing on playability and sound quality, and enjoys working in a variety of woods. So with that, I'm going to hand the time over to Richard, The format is the artist will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll get about 10 minutes of performance in between, and I will be keeping time.
Why are you looking at me like that?
That sounded like a threat.
Yeah. Hi, thank you all so much for coming out. It's great to see so many familiar faces and new faces too. My name is Richard, and I guess I'm here to talk about my journey with specifically this instrument here. These are both instruments I made, and they kind of have a connection. And so, can you guys hear me? I don't think I need this. Okay, so how do I get this thing to go? Just push buttons?
The side arrows will
perfect. Okay, so when I was about 15 years old, I there was like a free TV channel that you could get on UHF that would play French movies sometimes. And so there was one time where I was watching that and I heard this sound and it really flipped my lid, so to speak. Tous les matins du monde it was a movie, and the sound was like right on the edge of, like, it's so beautiful, but it's right on the edge of being like terrible, like hurting you. It's like, and so it's like almost like watching a tightrope walker or something like that when you hear the sound of it. And it's such a beautiful instrument. I thought about getting one, is what I was thinking. Oh, I got to get one, and just no way. I like looked up how much they cost. This is before the internet, and there was just no chance. And so I started to, I left that in the back of my mind and kind of moved on. The player is the guy who plays the instrument that I heard in the movie. The actual musician is Jordi Savall, and this is him. And he's kind of been a hero of mine for many years. Just his work in music is pretty tremendous, and his talent is amazing, and he's just an amazing person. And so I thought I might start with a smaller instrument than the bass viol. Warren's here, and Warren makes all kinds of viols, but I am so grateful to Warren because I was able to learn so much from him. There's nothing, we're in a bit of a desert as far as like cultural goes. I mean, there's different types of cultures, but this specific type of stuff is pretty hard to come by. In England, there's a school that Warren went to. There's a couple of them, I guess, but now maybe only one now. Anyhow, well, Warren went there, and when we met, we started hanging out and stuff. And I had already built one, which I didn't bring, but it's pictured in that. You can see the one with the kind of snakier F-holes over here. So that one, I just made it. I just like kind of went for it. Didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, sort of. I've been working on instruments a lot by that time, but it didn't have any real good information. So anyway, where did this instrument come from? What is it? Well, that's a good question. Thanks for asking. Vihuela de arco en mano. Those are like one with the bow and one with the hand that you play. They're from Spain, and that's kind of started it. And I feel a little bit strange because we have another viola da gamba expert here in the audience. So I don't want to misspeak. So maybe you can correct me if I say anything incorrect. But if we tend to go towards iconography for these early instruments a lot because many of them don't survive. And iconography is problematic, and there's proof up here. Does anybody see the way they're playing the bowed instrument? Yep, right there. They're on the wrong side of the bridge, so that's not going to work. Or, it's not going to be that sounding that nice, an angelic sound. I don't think so. So we have that, but you can see there. What's interesting to me about these pictures is that you can really kind of get the feeling that these have bent sides instead of carved sides. So the sides are very thin instead of being carved. A lot of medieval instruments were carved. The back and sides would be carved, and the neck all out of one piece. And so they were kind of heavy and clunky and have a different type of sound. This time period is really like, I don't know, I kind of live in this time period in my mind. Time travel there a lot. And 1500, right at that time, 1492, a lot of things were going on all over the world, right? And, I mean, everywhere you look, there was something going on. Babur the Great, the Mughal emperor, he came in out of, down into the plains of India and took over all of India. The Aztec Empire was flourishing and just about to not be anymore. But Cortez was over there, and there was just so much happening. So Borgias came and became the Pope. So Rodrigo Borgia came to Italy and Rome and became the Pope. And this is from his papal apartments, a painting that is right there from 1493, shortly after he got there. And you can see in this picture, I have some details. The guy in the red, he's got the Vihuela de Mano, and she has what looks like it could be a Lira de Baccio. So that's the Italian version of this kind of Vihuela de Mano. So the Italians at that time, of course, were interested in very interested in the ancient Greeks and like bringing the Renaissance back and learning all those things. So they thought, once they had heard a bowed instrument, they thought, Apollo, he played a lyre. He played, the lyre is this is the lyre. You know, it's a bowed instrument. It sounds so much better than something that you just pluck like the ones that you think of with the Greek ones. And so it became a really popular instrument amongst like the intellectuals of Italy at that time. And so here's some examples. I believe this one is carved back in sides and neck all in one, and then the face is put on, but they're starting to get the shape of the violin, right? So these are the predecessor of the violin as well. And it's speculated about who brought the technology to Italy of bent sides. In Spain, they were using bent sides for sure because of the Moorish influence. They had already had instruments that used bent wood, and the technology was pretty good. And at the same time, in 1492, what else happened? What happened in Spain, right? A bunch of people got kicked out of there, right? So the Sephardic people moved to Venice, and Venice became a place where you see these instruments. There's a style there, and there's a pretty significant chance that there was some interaction. It doesn't have to be just the Sephardic people, but I would say Spanish people in general. You know, the Borgia came in there, and I think Henry VIII, pretty soon after this, married Catherine of Aragon after his brother was passed away, and she brought with her to England Spanish files too. So we hear all this stuff, and so you hear the name vihuela is the Spanish name for it, right? And then it became viola in Italy and viol in England, and so it's kind of an interesting way that all happened. This painting here is pretty interesting to me too, because Leonardo da Vinci was said to have played the Lira de Baccio, and he made his own one out of silver in the shape of a horse head, is what they say. I cannot, a horse skull with silver. I don't know. We'll see. When I get up to heaven, I'm going to ask him. But this was one of his students. Painted this under his supervision, and it shows a Lira de Baccio, or it's hard to tell. It could be just a plain VL, but I think it's a Lira de Baccio. So this is another Lira de Baccio. It shows you how kind of crazy they got. This is all carved out of one piece again, the neck and back and sides, and it has all these faces on it. It also has breasts. I don't know if you can see them on the front and the back. So somebody was having fun. They really having fun touching that instrument all the time. This is 1511 in Verona. And so here's something from Giovanni Maria. You can just hear him like, "Hey, Giovanni, pass me the lira." But in 1511 over there, and that one has bent sides. So the other one that was 1511 we just saw, that one had carved sides. This one has bent sides, and then this is another instrument he made, 50 years or more later. That has these are both in the Ashmolean. I got to see them this last summer, which was pretty great. So then you think to yourself like, how am I going to make this? Well, you got to find the right tree, right? So find the right tree, and it gets easy. So let's just talk a little bit about the construction. And this is the first one I made. Some pictures I took in the process, and this is it finished. I didn't bring it, but then that's a picture I took through a camera obscura that I made. Actually, I didn't take it. My brother Harry took the picture, but I set it all up. And that was quite a long time ago. I got to play this instrument a lot out like in Renaissance fairs and things like that. Had a lot of fun with it. I got obsessed with kind of making one more like Jordi Sabal's. I hear him play, sounds so good. The instrument's an amazing sounding instrument. It really fills up halls, and it's just such a powerful instrument. So I went down a rabbit hole, and I really thank Rhonda for putting up with me all those years, because I literally would just wait till everybody went to bed, and I would stay up all night on the internet looking for pictures and videos and clips and stopping them and freezing them and trying to figure out how big it is. And I finally found a photograph from a gatefold album that was on the internet that had a straight shot right on the viol, right, perfectly lined up from far, far away. so that all the camera distortion was gone, and then they had all these other instruments in it that I knew what size they were. So I was able to use that to kind of get closer to what it was. And my guesses actually turned out to be really good in the first place. So so then I went to see Jordi Savall with Warren and my wife Rhonda, and when we went there, I brought my viol. I was like, I'm going to show him my viol. See what he said. And I chickened out. I left it in the car. But I did go up and talk to him after, which was you're not supposed to do that at the Disney concert hall. I charmed one of the guards there. She was very sweet, and I was able to charm her. And she said, well, if they ask you what happened, then just tell them that you stuck past me or whatever. Like, I don't know anything about this. So I went and spoke to him in Spanish. I asked him how long was the scale length, and he went like this. 14. So that was pretty great. And afterward, we were standing in line to get CDs signed, and Rhonda had gone to the car and gotten my viol. So right when I got there, I had it. I was able to show it to him, and so you can. Here are some pictures you can see really quick of just how I tried to get the headstock correct and things. I did my own thing a little bit, but pretty close. And this is some more process shots of carving it out. It's got that wee little bass bar in there. And there's just some more pieces before it goes together. And then this is what happened when I met Jordi Savall. He decided to take a picture of me. So that was kind of, that was pretty incredible. He's like, hey, do you mind if I take a picture of you? I was like, go ahead. So that's all I really have. I wanted to ask if there were any questions. Anybody? Yeah.
Or some of those viols, were they wedge shaped?
Wedge shaped.
Kind of like I've seen similar instruments in different musical instrument museums. We were in Barcelona. I saw one there, and it was wedge shaped like this. The body.
Oh yeah. I've seen those. Yeah, that I know what you're talking about. I forgot what those are called. They're similar. They're usually kind of smaller. Yeah. There's that really grotesquely carved one. It has a little handle that you reach your hand inside.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you're talking. I can't think of the name of it, but I do know what you're talking about. No, viols. I mean, like later on, they start to get. You'll see when Warren comes up, he's got some more Baroque. This is like Renaissance, and so they're fairly primitive, which is.
But 14-inch scale.
14-ish.
Yeah.
He's the maker. I'm not telling you.
It's a maker. It could be a mandolin.
Smooth move, Ed. Try yeah.
In both pictures with angels, they're pointing it downward.
Yes.
How do you play this thing?
Well, I played in my lap because it became what they call the viola da gamba. So this, by the time you get here, this is a treble viol or a viola da gamba, which means the viol of your lap, something that you set on your lap. So people started playing that way. But the Lira de Baccio was often played like this, or like you see him even like, I don't know, man, you see him doing all this crazy stuff like and things. So going deaf in one ear, I guess. So any other questions? Yeah.
What's the difference between a viola and a violin?
A viola is bigger.
It's a larger.
Tuned to like a fifth down, so it has a C string, and then instead of below the G, and then get rid of the E string. So that's just a regular viola. Yeah.
What are the woods you use?
Great question. Man, I was going to hand out a thing that said there's a few questions you ask. How long does it take? What kind of wood? That's one of them. And the wood is just simple. This is spruce, and this one is really just spruce and maple. And then it's got bone pegs.
And how long does it take?
It takes. That one took me 10 years. I mean, it didn't take me 10 years of working on it, but 10 years to figure out all the things I was doing, in my mind, sorting things out. So when you're making a new instrument, or this one's kind of a copy-ish, but it takes a lot more time than if you're just copying something. Mm-hmm. If you're making a new design, I know Otto does this often too. It takes a lot longer to do it. And Warren too. Warren's doing his own thing.
Plans really help.
What's that?
Plans
really help. I mean, yeah. I haven't been able to put up with that too much. Only on violins. Yeah.
Explain the discrepancy in the other instrument with the strings off to the side.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's also characteristic of the Lira de Baccio. It has these droning strings, which I kind of emulate here on these ones. So a lot of times they would do something like this. See, sit it down. So you can get kind of a. So that's why they would use those strings to kind of. And what was done was they were using it to accompany poetry. So they would often play, the Lira de Baccio was designed for accompanying poetry, often sung. And another thing about Leonardo da Vinci, he was said to be a really good singer and poet and everything. But once you get that famous, then everybody says you're the best at it. Yeah. Can't lose, yeah.
I'm curious about your process. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about maybe challenges that came up and how you did them.
Oh man, challenges. Boy. My process is pretty focused, and I tend to stir up a bunch of chaos in my world while I'm doing this, and I go poke. It's kind of like I would say like making a new thing like that would be kind of like kneading dough with one finger, or just ding ding ding, all these different directions, and then you kind of wrap it up. I had a benchmate when I was in violin making school, and she was from Japan, and she just had this I would just marvel at her because she would just step one, like it was kind of like she went A, B, guess what's next? C, and I was like A, M, Q. Oh, Q looks really cool. So, and I would kind of go all over the place. And she was looking at me like I was crazy, and I was looking at her like she was crazy. And then by the end, we both had beautiful instruments. So, just people have different methods of getting there. Usually right at the end, I'm like, ah! And then it's like, boom. So it comes together. So, any other questions? I think we're pretty close to time.
Yeah, and we will have time for more questions at the very end.
Okay, good. So I wanted to introduce Milo Gonzalez, who is going to play for us a little bit. This instrument here, which is this is a jarana, which is also from around this one is really I made it myself. I just did it based on what they were doing back then. I kind of just went, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm back then, and so I just did it. And what happened is this instrument is based off the Baroque guitar, which was made out of really, really thin wood. Once they learned how to bend wood thin, and that they started making everything really thin. But they would when they took it to the Americas, they would just fall apart in the tropical weather. And so they were trying to use music to court the native people into Christianity. And so, and amongst other ways too. So they wanted to make instruments like this. And what they did was they started to carve them again out of all one piece. So this instrument is all one piece from the bottom to the top. And it's carved out, the neck is hollow, and the inside is, the face just has been glued on there. And so that's it. And rattlesnake tails. Good juju. Yeah. I'm gonna have you play.
All right.
Maybe we'll play together. How's that?
Yeah.
Do you want to, or you can just do it. I'd rather you do it.
I'll play a little bit and then we play together.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So you can introduce us. So this is kind of like the vihuela de mano in a way, but it's like where the Baroque guitar started to come through.
So honored to own this thing. Played lots of instruments, but this thing really is mystical, to say the least. So I'll just twiddle. Get you in here.
Here, you sit on this one. I need that one. Okay, actually, I just want to listen to you play more.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what do you think? I'll just start this. I have it tuned. This is kind of tuned right now, more Lira de Baccio style, the droney notes at the bottom.
This is a very special event right here because we're going to jump 500 years into the future and then jump 500 years back. So hopefully no one gets whiplash today. I'm Otto D'Ambrosio, and yesterday my son graduated high school. We're all so proud of him. But it had me thinking about, that age of a teenager and these years of your life where you kind of, it seems like there's anything you can do, or at least anything you think you can do is possible. And it had me thinking also about the time that, what I did during these formative years of my life. And I was fortunate enough to have a family that supported me to do very creative things. And one of those things during my teenage years is I built my first electric guitar. And it was out of a piece of plywood, 3/4 inch plywood. And it was I found objects and parts of things that people gave me. And it was the shape of a flying V. So it was a tribute to Randy Rhoads, who played with Ozzy? Yeah, Ozzy or Black Sabbath. Yeah, Ozzy. So, and I was so proud of this thing. It did not play at all. It was the worst thing ever. But I was very proud of it. And it was named Vomit. I had to name it. And it was black and purple, like splotches. And my father had recommended at the time that I walk into a store and I show someone to validate this building of this instrument. So I did that. And the owner of the store was taken aback that there was this, 13-year-old kid walking in with a plywood guitar and he couldn't really play it at all. And he was very honest about it. And he asked me if I wanted to work there. And it was, after school time. And I said, sure, why not? It seems like a great after school job. And it was janitorial tasks of taking out garbage and filling up humidifiers and getting cases. Of course, that's your big role in this store, was to go get the cases out in the garage and find them first. So I did that for a few years before realizing what this guitar store was. And it happened to be one of the most successful vintage guitar stores in New York City. It was called Mandolin Brothers. And Stan Jay, the owner, during those times was usually the first person that someone would go to find out the value of their collectible guitar, which at that time in the 90s, guitars weren't really known as collectible yet, or at least not at that level. Eric Clapton did Unplugged on MTV, and all of a sudden acoustic music became the biggest thing. And seeing this store blossom into, one of these stores that sold to, these really celebrated artists and musicians and players, and being there as a kid just kind of grounded me to understanding that this is something I will do for the rest of my life in one way or the other. The store and the people in that store really became an extended family. They supported me in whatever I wanted to do, other than getting cases, of course. But yeah, it was really, certainly as a teenager, and being there was really one of these things that really changed my life. So there's a lot of similarities with that store, I feel, in Claremont, just with the center here and folk music and the connection between, acoustic music and just the awareness of it. And and it's one of the reasons why I try to stay so close to Claremont and stores and music and my fellow luthiers, and I do believe it's one extended family. So at the time of working at Mandolin Brothers, there was one builder that really was starting to build instruments that were very different than anything that had existed at the time. And he was a New York City builder named John D'Angelico. And he worked right out of New York City. And he was really starting to, at least open up the door for someone to change the idea of what an archtop guitar should be. An archtop guitar started off as an instrument primarily used for orchestras. So they were played in large ensembles of players, and maybe, so Orville Gibson created the first one right about the beginning of the 20th century. And he designed it to sound different so it could be heard in these large orchestras. So he decided that it would be built like a European classical instrument. So just like Richard was describing, either it was carved or bent. Archtop guitars, like this one here on the left, is completely carved. The top and the back are carved with bent sides. So those years at Mandolin Brothers in the beginning of the 90s, it this was an exciting time for the archtop. His contemporaries, Jimmy D'Acquisto and John Monteleone, they kind of went through the door and then just kept on going to really kind of revolutionize what these instruments were to become throughout the early 2000s and onward. And it really just, I couldn't believe that, for what the guitar was, the archtop was still a relatively new thing, and it was really exciting to be a part of that. Every opportunity I took to train and work and to ask questions and to build, I took through that store and my network of people that worked at Mann Brothers. So what is an archtop guitar? It is, and why is it unique, I guess, is a question that I'm always struggling to find, but it is this instrument that sounds very different, and we'll hear it a little bit later. But it does sound very different from a flat top acoustic guitar. These guitars are carved from a solid piece of wood on the top and the back. The sides are bent, and there's nothing that is glued to the top of the instrument, just like a violin or viola or viol. It's completely free-floating, so the top's able to sound and not be impeded by any kind of pickup or anything that's screwed into the top or glued in or anything like that. So everything you see here is completely floating above the top, and the only thing that's actually touching it is this bridge, which is not glued in. That is just held in there by the string tension. These instruments were voiced, to take into account volume and projection. In orchestra settings, you're always struggling to be heard because there is, at that time anyway, there wasn't any kind of electric amplification. So the only way to be heard is to be louder and not necessarily be louder, but also to have that quality where it cuts through the majority of the other instruments. So mid-range is really good for that, any kind of acoustic setting where you want a very throaty sound, where it actually throws the sound out and you can hear it. It's not completely covered up or muddy by bass notes or anything like that. These days, volume isn't as important. That's why, generally speaking, when archtops were first conceived, they were enormous instruments. Some of the early Strombergs are like 19 inches across, 3.5 inches deep. They were just completely unwieldy to play, where, modern builders generally stick to about 16 or 17 inches across the lower bow.
Otto, could we ask you to use your microphone?
Sure.
There's an AC unit running.
Oh, let me see. Okay, is that on there? Okay, great. So a lot has changed over the past 100 years for archtop guitars. Mostly when I think of an archtop, it's really about making a completely cohesive vision about what the guitar is supposed to be. Every piece is really kind of built and made to kind of flow around what the vision of the instrument should be. The instrument on the right here it's not a carved guitar. It is built more like a flat top instrument, but it has the same geometry and kind of physics of an archtop. So I was really trying to figure out if there was a way to kind of pull out all of the clarity and mid-range of an archtop with it being a flat top instrument that is somewhat easier to play, a little bit more throaty for a flat top, but more of a parlor type guitar. It is a modern instrument, but really trying to become something that you would see maybe in the 1800s or something. That's as far as I get for going back in time. But
could you talk about the bracing a little bit in that one?
Sure. This is it is an X-brace guitar. The back is an offset ladder braced. So The X brace will go down, but since it's a parlor, it's a very long X brace. I chose to keep the sound hole very small to keep as much of the top plate to kind of amplify as much of the sound as I could, but I did add in a sound port on the side, which is a very modern feature for instruments that acts as like a monitor for an acoustic guitar, where you're, as a player, you're actually able to hear this instrument, personally. I mean, this isn't something you would play, a stage or anything with. It's more of a parlor guitar, exactly what it's made to do, something you'd play in your living room or on your couch or something very intimate settings. This is what you'd choose. Process. Richard touched on it a little bit. As instrument luthiers and artists, process could be sometimes extremely easy, sometimes extremely frustrating. I think I find most of my difficulty in actually choosing individual pieces of wood. So in the beginning stages of building instruments, it's extremely hard to figure out what this thing is, and that's really, the ultimate goal of building an instrument is finding, what is the overall theme, or what is the overall idea, or, sometimes it's easy to work with a customer and kind of pull things out of them that they're looking for, but if you're building something from spec or something for a show, it's always hard for me to find what it is. So this guitar on the right, finished probably about 3 years ago, and it was built because I was challenged to make an instrument that was feminine. Feminine, yeah. I was always told that I make very masculine instruments. So it's something that's very macho, machismo or something. So this was my first opportunity to kind of go down. So that from the finish to the very organic fingerboard inlay to the light bursting on the sides. There's even a subtle pearlescent finish, like blush, that is a powder that is dropped into the lacquer. But yeah, it has a very, very light, resonant sound to it, which I think came off very well, which I'm happy to have it here today. This instrument here, again, was just a concept. I was very, very interested in trying to hash out at the time. The first one was built for a very good friend. And we really wanted to pioneer a parlor guitar that was built more like an archtop instrument that sounded very different, that wasn't bass heavy, that kind of had a lot of gypsy guitar qualities to it. So something that threw a little bit of sound, wasn't as muddy, but had a lot of qualities in mid-range and throatiness and just, something different. And I think it came off very well. I'll just open it up for questions, I think would be fine. Milo?
Are both of those guitars using the same type of strings?
Yeah, they're not. Primarily the jazz guitars, so the archtops. If it has a pickup, I'll usually do nickel strings on them. If it's an acoustic archtop, usually phosphor or bronze would be preferable. But on the parlor guitar, it's primarily to use a silken steel, so the cores of the strings are a nylon or silk, and then they're wound with silver, a silver winding across them. It just gives them a little more, the tension is a lot less, and they just do give a lot more kind of warmness and roundness.
And did you design it for those strings from the get-go, so the bracing is super light, so you can get the resonance? Is that all part of the thinking?
Yeah, exactly. So strings and what music is going to be played on it is usually the most important thing, because that means tension, So yeah, you will actively always think about how much tension the top is going to take into account. So yeah, this instrument, extremely thin braced top. It's only one lateral brace down here, so underneath the bridge, but it's pretty much just the main X brace across the top. The tailpiece is cast out of bronze and stainless, which just adds a little more sustain to it, which I found helped. I used to use a wood block in there, but yeah, I think I like the casting just to give a real solid connection for the strings and let them resonate on the bridge as much as possible. Yeah.
Two questions. What do you use for the inlay, and do you still have vomit?
Yeah, no, yeah, I lost that guitar. Yeah, I don't have that guitar. I have no idea where it is. I don't even have a picture of it. It's disappointing, but that's okay. If you find it, right? So the inlays are a mixture of white pearl, brown lip pearl, and yellow pearl. So mother of pearl has these amazing qualities of depending on where it's harvested from, how old it is, where, at what portion. It's a lot like a piece of wood, how it's, where it's cut, how it's cut. It kind of gives you totally different qualities to it. But yeah, I've got a lot of humanely harvested abalone shells that I will use on occasion for inlays. Yeah, it smells horrible. I mean, I hate cutting it, but it is very pretty, and it's a really, really nice, pearlescent quality to, the shine, especially for inlays. And if it's contrasting on an ebony board, it's just, they've used it for centuries. So yeah.
Thanks. A lot of the design things you've mentioned about archtop guitars remind me of what mandolin players like as well, the rationale behind archtop mandolins.
Exactly.
Throaty timbre, mid-range, and projection, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm wondering if you're interested in, or if you do mandolin building as well.
I'm certainly involved with it, with a lot of different. Maybe one day I'll get to a mandolin. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, Orville Gibson developed the first archtop guitar, right around the beginning of the 20th century. About 30 years later, Lloyd Lohr worked with him to develop pretty much the most collectible, mandolin archtop guitars, and that was a revolution unto itself at that time. There's always, and the thing is, I mean, there's such a parallel between these two instruments, and also with the Baroque instruments as well. I mean, there's such a similarity. I hope we can all leave today with they're very, very far apart from each other. We're talking 500 years of development and design, but on some levels they're very similar instruments. With the process and especially the woods. I mean, this is a maple and spruce archtop guitar, just like Richard's instrument was a maple and spruce. I mean, it's amazing, and there's reasons for that. It is because these woods are superior for making projection, poppiness, and just a true acoustic, archtop throaty sound. Yeah.
Otto, I have a question.
Sure.
Do you have the same problem I do where it's like some of the times for me, it's like hard to cut into some of the wood that I have. Like I just don't want to cut it. I'll make out of some plain stuff or something, or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that, like I said, like finding the right piece of wood and then using it is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
Just for that reason. I mean, these things are, they're living things. they were from these living trees, and now you're going to use them one day. Is now the right time for that? I'm constantly struggling with that question. So yeah, it's. But I mean, this is our task, right?
Yeah. I don't think Warren struggles at all.
I'm okay on time. About 15 or.
We'll have more time at the end for more questions if you're going to go with performance. That would be
great.
For it, yeah.
If I could introduce a good friend, Tommy Davy of Django Guitars here. He's going to play a couple pieces, and we'll get to hear these things.
play a little jazz for you guys. Should I play acoustic first and then some jazz?
Yeah, I mean, it's louder than that guy, so.
Sure.
That would be cool, and just add in a little after.
Yeah. a jazz comping style that oftentimes, you know, archtop will play, and they play, you know, if you're playing in a big band, you know, the old style is.
And then it gets loud.
Yeah.
Not that loud.
Yeah.
It's this 1960 or so. Charlie Christian started.
It's like when the archtop meets the electric guitar, you know? Just as a side note, like, I see a lot of guitars as I'm a guitar dealer on the side, but I'm also a musician. But like, this is one of the most exquisite guitars I've ever seen, because he gave me this guitar a couple days ago to practice on to get ready for this thing, and I was just marveling at, like, you don't see guitars like this. It's exceptional. But I was going to just mention that, like, one of the coolest features I've ever seen on a guitar are these two little faders. So usually they're these little thumb wheels here, but he designed these little faders built into the pickguard. So I just thought that was, like, really trick.
Volume and tone, right?
Yeah, volume and tone right there, but it's like, it's just super nifty. I'll make this short.
My name is Warren Shingleton, and I'm a viol maker. Most of you probably have become slightly more familiar with the terminology of what a viol is, but it's basically a Baroque string instrument that's related to both the guitar and played similarly to the cello. So it's designed to be played with a bow. And that's one of the main fundamental differences that evolved and changed the direction of musical history from the viola da manos and the viola da arcos from the Renaissance period and the medieval period through into the Baroque period, where the viola and the guitar went in several different directions. And as you can see from Otto's instruments, they're 500 years later, but the archtop guitar still shares very much a lot of the same fundamental making traditions as the classical European instruments of the time. The violin family, the viol family, and the guitar family, all over the course of history have evolved to include several different slightly adjusted, augmented, similar styles of making for their different themes. The viol was a result of Catherine of Aragon and those transferring of refugees into England at the time, causing the English folk music tradition to sort of blossom and flourish beyond any kind of doubt from where it had been originally. From my understanding, the English folk tradition had gone back basically to the foundation of the country, or the establishment of the British Isles, really, in terms of their tradition. And you saw that also with Italy and France and Germany as well. But the Spanish were the ones that really had the music and had the instruments and had the passion for it at the time. By the time in, say, the 15th century, when these people were spreading across Europe and they ended up coming to England with their instruments, you saw that the primitive English instruments, suddenly all of the local makers became really curious. Just like Richard and Otto and I, we've become a little group, and we've shared ideas, we've expressed questions, we've talked amongst each other, we've shared pieces of wood, we've asked, hey, I have a hard time finding this. Do you have any ideas or leads for where I can source it? Or I'll trade you this piece of wood for that piece of wood too. And what you ended up seeing is that really elevated all of the English tradition of woodworking, the English tradition of instrument making, and really solidified the English role in developing this music for their choral tradition through church. So what you would find up into, say, these instruments being produced originally was that the vocal parts of the chorus were then being able to try and be filled amongst the congregation in terms of the different voices. If you're a woman or a small child, maybe you sang the more alto and soprano parts. If you were a bass or a bigger, taller person, maybe you played the rest of it. And so what they saw was that now that we started to develop these instruments to engage in the tradition of not just the singing of music, but also the performing and playing of music, you got these instruments to start to fill the same voices and the same roles with the choral music that became now into these groups of music to be performed. Very early on, kind of around the time that Henry VIII was around, just like the Herman's Hermit song for those people that are from the back generation. The main focus of instrument making at that time was basically through organs and early primitive stringed instruments. But along the way, Henry VIII basically granted, through a royal charter, the ability for this family of instrument makers to take over a palace on the side of the Thames. And he got the whole palace, the whole grounds, the whole estate, everything. And it became the center of an instrument making workshop that took over that part of England for several hundred years. It started out as an organ workshop. And then what happened was that the family moved in through to the changing of the royalty. It got donated instead to a viol making family who made stringed instruments. So the viols at the time were more guitar-esque. They had less corners, were a little bit more flowy, like the Giovanni Maria Brescia Lira de Baccio that Richard showed earlier. That was the curvy one without any corners on the right side here of the screen. You'd see that was very much what we'd call like a guitar shape. And at the time, these instruments were kind of at that transition between actually figuring out where the corners were going to be, how long does the body need to be, where does the neck need to meet the body in order for the strings to be that way. And all these things were kind of morphing in an evolution. And what we know now, me making these instruments currently, is that I can make them whatever size my clients would like me to make them as. but it all follows the same tradition. But back then what you would do is, if I was walking into an instrument shop in London in the 1600s, and I didn't see a viol that I wanted, they would measure the span of your hand or try to play a variety of sizes of the instruments so that what you would see is how they would need to modify or where they would need to lengthen it. One of the key features of these instruments, well, it's the same feature basically, is that like with the archtop guitar that Otto was talking about, what you see is that the bridge doesn't have any connection to the front other than the pressure of the strings holding it in place. Because of that, we call that a floating bridge. And therefore, as a result, if you take the string pressure off, the bridge is going to either fall down or go flying across the room. So what you would see is that the frets, if you wanted to play these instruments, they need to not only survive the length of time that you're playing them, but also be able to change if, say, your bridge slipped and you needed to change it. So they've tied these frets to the neck of the instrument versus inlaying them or setting them in to the front of the fingerboard, so that if you were to change the position of the bridge, you could still be able to tune the frets so that your intonation wouldn't be lacking. That evolution came out pretty early, and that was also because at the time these instruments were mainly using gut strings. Everybody thinks and hears the term that, oh, they're using catgut strings, and that was all from little animals. Well, it turns out that we basically get most of our gut from cow and sheep these days, and there are, for those people that are vegans and vegetarians, they do make synthetic strings that are for those affiliations if you do have an issue. But we won't get into the glue because that's a different story. And so there's many different elements. So the first family that settled in the palace on the side of the Thames was basically what we consider the founders of the viol tradition in England. They were called the Rose family, and there's a famous consort of instruments now of musicians in England that are called the Rose consort, and they've been playing for decades. And but what it is that John Rose and his son, who also shared the same name, basically established the super ornately refined, decorative, sort of modern Baroque form of the viol that we know it, which is basically what you see, the outline of these two shapes. They worked for 30 or 40 or 50 years, which ultimately led to Queen Elizabeth took over and inherited the realm, which then meant that all of the previous royal occupants needed to remove themselves from the formerly established palaces and buildings. So then what you would see is that those workers that were employed by the Roses had to go find work. At the time we had a guild system. It wasn't like I could just walk down the street and go into the town hall and sign the paperwork and, hey, I can make instruments now, What you had to do was that you had to go and you had to become an apprentice. Not only did you have to become an apprentice, you had to serve a period of time to be able to prove that you could, while residing there, that you could make and work and function at these instruments to be able to give you the success to take you to the next step. But it was still all basically kind of what we consider like a union would be. There was a hierarchy. And so there wasn't a guild for instrument makers. So it was sort of wherever you went. So following the Roses' dissolution, several really famous viol makers in England following that, named Henry James and Richard Mears, came out of that workshop, and we see that their work and those connections in the carving that they do. There was a couple of, I don't know if you want to call them griffins or parrots or birds or serpents or flying serpents or whatever, but there were a couple of local termed ideograms that people used that represented the fact that we were part of that workshop. And yes, we were trained there, and we were part of that training, which followed through into our work. And now we're trying to find more work and make these instruments, and it's embodied in it. So what you would see sometimes is that I do things for a certain reason sometimes, but what you would see is that on the side of the instrument here on the peg box, there would be carvings, not just like on the back, but you would see that there would be carvings on the sides too. And what you would see a lot of the time was that those same little characters of the parrots and the griffins would show up in places like that where it's still in plain sight, but you kind of still got to look at it. And then that was what they were using to establish that they were all part of the same family and had all been part of the same kind of maker sphere and had been brought up in some of the same tradition. But so as a result of those, now we have suddenly several handful of now famous significant makers in England. They're all making these instruments, they're becoming more popular. But that's England. What's going on over in Germany and in France and in Italy? Well, what you end up seeing is that the talk and the word of these amazing sounding instruments had traveled throughout all of the continent of Europe, and everybody else was really enamored by the sound of these instruments, and most of them hadn't really ever heard of them because social media didn't exist. And so they got enthusiastic about it. So the French ended up, in order to kind of continue their animosity and mutual joint engagement with the English, decided to take these music, but we're going to try and expand upon it. And they said, so how can we do better than the English in this regard? And what they ended up coming up with is that they invented technology that fundamentally changed the instrument. And what they did was it wasn't anything related to the wood. They didn't change the technical abilities in which it was put together. What they did was they focused on the strings. And so what the French invented was the way in which you could wrap and wind metal wire around a gut core of the string to be able to make a sound that functions at a lower note at the same tension that's a thinner diameter. I know it's complicated, but basically you don't want the string on the low end of a bass like this one to be so thick that you can't really even press it down and play it, because it's so thick then it also can't speak. And if it can't speak, then it can't sound and you can't play it, and then we don't have a performance. So what they decided to do is that by winding the string over the top of the gut, you're able to reduce that diameter while retaining all of the resonance and at that lower tension to where you weren't going to break the instrument, and it would still sound and it would still move and fluctuate in the ways that we wanted it to sound to make beautiful noise. And that fundamentally changed the state of music pretty much across all of Europe at that point in, say, we're not really sure, but at some point between the 1640s and the 1650s. And the French took that, like in Tous les Matins du Monde, the movie that Richard was mentioning at the start of his talk, that was a really transformative moment in the viol. It opened up the viol to a whole other world through Hollywood that would not have anyways necessarily been associated with it unless they heard it on Game of Thrones. What ended up happening with those French instruments is that it basically took over that predominance, and then you had another fight between the English and French as to who made the best instruments. And what you saw was that the French instruments, in particular the 7-string basses, were able to play much more solo repertoire because they had more of a range. And because they had a slightly more range, they were more dynamic and more expressive. They also tended to have a bigger body to facilitate that lower, longer string that they had. And as a result, you'd find that they also were be able to take a more of a palatial setting in, say, a court of musicians playing for a king. You'd find that they had these instruments there, and you could fill that space because they were a slightly larger size and had more of that dynamicism of range. The English ones, you basically mainly ended up playing as a group and in a consort, it's called, where you had several different sizes of the member of family all playing together at the same time. And that distinction kind of translated to the French court, but with the Jordi Savall, he plays with a group of not just viol players, but with harpsichords and guitarists and other stringed instrument players and woodwind players as well, and to create a more dynamic orchestra to be able to encompass a big range of music. A lot of the French music is basically only for solo viol or for an accompaniment with the solo viol for the most part. And you do get other pieces, but it also has a slightly different role. The French were really instrumental in kind of they made an 8-string one, which is like this, but it has 8 strings. So it would have a shorter neck, and then it would have another string on the top end too. And there was only one of those. It's in the Paris Museum of Musical Instruments, and it's totally gilded. The whole neck is gilded, all of it's gilded, and it survives, and it was made for French, was it Rameau?
I think so.
Who ended up composing this piece for this file, probably for the person who commissioned the instrument. And all of those were, they all were performed basically for one time, and then that instrument's resided in this museum for the rest of its life. And it was a sort of a fluke in that regard, and you get some of those, and those are some of the ones that we end up seeing in the museums. About what they say is about 5% of all of the surviving vials that were made from the 14th to the 1700s, 5% of them survive. So what we end up thinking about, or what I've thought about most of my life, has been, of those 5% that survive, why have they survived? Is it because of the context of the construction? Did they sound bad? Were they unable to be played? Did they have some, were they broken? Did they get fixed along the way? Or what you find with a lot of the vials is that they got converted into cellos. And so after their life as a viol, when the rise of the orchestra came and overtook the role of the nature of these vials as being the sort of the popular preeminent major instrument around all of European music for those hundreds of years, you saw that the violin family rose up and took that over. And then you saw that these instruments that were sitting around now found other uses for other things. And until recently, there was even some where you had viols converted into cellos that were being used in orchestras instead of having a cello. But what happens is that another difference that is hard to tell is that this has a flat back. It doesn't have an arched back. And so the problem with a flat-backed instrument versus an arched-back instrument is that the projection and the carrying power of the sound isn't as important. And what ends up happening is that you get this really rumbly resonance that happens beside the instrument, but it doesn't ever get, that resonance is so powerful and is so rich that it doesn't translate into being able to project a long distance. So it sounds really great, but you're not really designed to hear it outside into the hallway. So you get into a smaller room like this, and at the time in England in the 15 to 1700s, you'd see a lot of the time they were being performed in music rooms with small groups or family members over after dinner or something, and you would find that it would be a way to pass time and be able to spend time enjoying playing music with your friends. Once that shifted and changed and the violin kind of became more popular, you got to see that people could express their wealth outside of their own home. You got to go to a concert hall. You could see some famous violinist come into town and go to a concert and then go home and say, hey, I went to the concert. And that didn't happen before that time period, really. And so these instruments fell by the wayside as a result of that social shift for the concert hall structure and the symphonic orchestra scheme, which then caused these instruments to stop being made. So like the last original viols were really made in the 1750s or 1760s. And after that, it took a long time for people like myself to get back interested in making them and to pick up where these makers had left off. With that 5% that survive, most of my colleagues have made a life making copies of those 5% that survive. A lot of the instruments that I make, I take some of the same shapes and some of the same outlines. Like I could tell you the models for these two instruments if anybody was interested, but it turns out that that's the only part of it that I took from that original instrument. Most of the rest of it has all been my work and my study to focus on making instruments for my clients. And I work on commission predominantly. It's not like I can just, I would wish that I could just make viols all day long and I could be able to sell them all, but mostly people come to me and say, hey, I need you to make an instrument for this, like that one specific French 8-string instrument, or they want an instrument that sounds or suits a certain style of their playing that they want. Or they don't have a tenor viol and are playing a piece and would like to have a tenor viol so that they can now have that part of the repertoire for when they go play with their friends. So I end up creating on commission a lot of the time, and so I work with my clients to really understand not just what woods we're going to use, because I don't even know sometimes at the start of the project what wood we're going to use, except for basically the front and the neck sometimes. I don't use Spanish cedar. I don't use spruce, and I don't use maple for my instruments. That's one of my main primary differences a lot of the time. And historically, these instruments were only made with spruce or maple, except for a few instruments in England which were made, and in Germany, which were made with either fruit wood or rosewood, because the makers didn't have access to the maple and the spruce. As part of my talk with my clients, engaging them about what they're playing and how they're using their instruments for, that ends up facilitating my ability to be able to start thinking about what kind of wood we can use. If they want it to sound darker, then I'm not going to choose a wood that's going to make the instrument sound brighter. I'm going to try and use something darker to be able to complement that. So anyways, that's it. I try and make my instruments very aesthetically pleasing. I make them all myself except for the strings. But that's it. Yeah, question?
So you say what you don't use. Tell us what you use.
Yeah.
Are they?
Yeah, I don't make the strings, and it's gut. They're sheep gut on the top, and they're cow gut for the bottom. These ones are wound over top of a thinner gut core.
I'm sorry, I was meaning wood species. So.
All right. Oh, got you. Oh, yeah. So basically, the name of the game is that for the fronts, I use cedars instead of spruces a lot of the time, because you still get that same clear, warm sound. But you still get the same clear sound, but it's warmer instead of brighter sounding. And then really for the back and the sides, it's whatever the client wants. I usually end up not using the same woods for both the back and the sides, which is also there. So you can further color the sounds to a degree by not having them be the same. In this case, they are the same. This is Peruvian walnut for the back and the sides here. And you can see here, this is the back. It's a really nice piece. We can show around. And another feature of this instrument while you're looking around and you can see the back of it and everything is that I've done this carving at the top. And one of the features of this carving is that you can see through it. And all of the little negative spaces in the carving are all cut out too. So there's the back, and then you can see the carving in the top. And the carving wraps around to the front. So if we show it, you can see here's the front of the instrument, right? And the carving comes around. Well, I've still hollowed out this part of the carving too, because you can still get access because of the open scroll here. And that's one of the other distinguishing characteristics, is that with the violin family, you get a closed scroll, and with the viol family, you generally get an open scroll, unless you're a French violin maker who makes viols, and then you get a closed scroll on a French viol. But so those kind of stylistic things are what I choose to embellish onto my instruments, in addition to sometimes my clients saying, hey, I don't want the normal carving, can you do something different? And I say, okay, well, yeah, we can. Another feature about this instrument is that most 7-string viols don't have a rose in the front. And this was a very English tradition of putting a rose into it. And actually, from a recording perspective in the modern text, if you stick a microphone right there, you get the clearest sound out of the viol that I've found to be recorded by. The wood for the neck is cherry a lot of the time that I use, because as a hard fruit wood, its looks and acts and functions very similar to maple in terms of carving and workability, but it's not bright white. And I use a clear finish for my instruments now, as opposed to the older varnish. I use a clear finish, so you get a little bit lighter, a little bit more resonance from the instrument, and it allows the natural colors of the wood to stand out a little bit more.
I'm going to be a problem.
I'm so sorry. We'll have time for more questions.
Yes.
I want to ensure that there's enough time.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a little performance, and we've got the Associate Professor of Music from Pomona College, Malachai, and Eva, assistant? Oh, sorry, assistant professor of music from Pomona College, and Eva, who's a professional Baroque cellist and viol player as well, and they're going to play these two lovely instruments for you guys. It's fun.
The strings are still stretching.
Right.
Actually, wait. Sorry, I switched it.
Want to say what you'll play?
Sure. We have a selection of a few short pieces for you, just so you get a sense of some of the music written for this instrument from various countries and composers. The first one I'll play is a prelude by Christopher Simpson. This is from his treatise, The Division Viol, from
1659, second edition, 1667.
Thank you, Encyclopedia.
The next piece is from about 1605 by someone named Tobias Hume, English, and it's in tablature, just like guitar tabs. So this is another meeting point between our traditions. You can see I'm not faking it. It is real. So you'll hear the tenor viol by Warren, featuring a turquoise nut. Did I again? These next two very short pieces, we just made a little set out of Vocal Polyphony by Lassus from the 16th century, so you'll get a sense of what Warren was talking about, the slippage between the vocal tradition and the string tradition. And we'll finish with two quick pop songs from 1553. Feel free to sing along. Diego Ortiz, 1553.
One time through the ground.
Yeah.